Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Psychedelics today here, joined by Tommaso Barba. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm coming out of a few funny days, interesting, fun days after the release of this new psychedelics and sex work.
Yeah, can you tell us the name of the paper that you just published?
Yeah. So the paper is called Psychedelics and Sexual Functioning, Mixed Method Studies, and it's on Nature Scientific Reports, and it's available open access. So we can share a link, and everyone who's curious and wants to read more is not behind a paywall. It's accessible by everyone.
Yeah, that's it's very progressive that we can actually access science. I love that. Thanks for doing it that way. Um,
Yeah, sometimes it is. It's usually like, yeah, a funny, interesting system, because usually some major universities cover this processing charges that are associated with open access journals. That is kind of funny, because then, yeah, we can do it, but like it's not something that like you can just, if you wish to do, and then you can do it, because yeah, it's still behind some internal paywalling systems between universities and scientific journal. But anyway.
so let's dig in. What uh, what was the question, or what got you curious in this topic and wanting to dig into the research here? I know you have a pretty heavy neuroscience background, so maybe there was some really interesting complexity there that was interesting to you.
I think it started like actually more from a societal perspective and point of view, because even if people are really not well versed in psychedelics, they probably
Yeah.
are familiar with the like make love not war ideas, and the hippie culture and their liberal sexual and loving attitudes that were happening around the 60s. And this is something that I think really sticked in historical narratives, but was never really investigated in a way. Like, was the association between the hippie and free love just cultural, or was there something more to it? And back in the days, there are a few reports that are like qualitative reports from people that were reporting and doing psychedelics to help them being more comfortable with their sexuality, with their own bodies, with their partners, and so on. There's this book that is called Me, Myself, and I, by this woman that talks how psychedelics basically helped her coming out from a very repressive sexual history, and in this way she kind of was able to enter in the sexual space within a very different way that she was before. And so there were like hit and bits here and there in the past that made a point that maybe psychedelics in some occasions can promote something that we could define as sexual flourishing, that is defined as a set of positive attitudes about your sexuality, your body, and your partners. And so, yeah, we were curious to investigate this and see if there was anything interesting to it.
I love that the technical term is flourishing. That's great. Um,
Yeah, I think I wouldn't call it like a technical term. I think it's something that we unfamiliarly refer to, because it's
mhm.
kind of like isn't in the like medically sexual functioning, but it's just not about functioning. So it's not like a performance definition of sexuality, like functioning can kind of like hint, but it's a bit more comprehensive, and that's why like informally we tended to call it flourishing. And it's a term that is was kind of like came up by Bruna Giribaldi, that is the senior author of the paper and is the lady that has initially the idea of looking into this way before I joined Imperial.
Oh, amazing. So, what were some surprises for you in the data in the findings?
Hmm. So should I give a bit of a background of like what the
Yeah,
findings,
please,
or should I just
please.
okay? So yeah, we basically like the study comprises of two sub-studies. The first one was focused on naturalistic psychedelic experiences, and we collected data from people that were going to ayahuasca ceremonies, mushroom ceremonies, and at other places where they could consume psychedelics. And we asked questions about their sex life before and after, and we asked how much pleasure they were getting from sex, how satisfied were with their partners, how able they were to communicate their desire with their partners, how satisfied were with their own bodies, and so on. And then we asked these questions again for weeks and 6 months after. And what we found was that people reported improvements in sexual well-being up to 6 months after the experience, like significant improvements overall in the group. And then we decided to look at psilocybin therapy for depression, because back then Imperial College was doing a lot of research on psilocybin for depression. And we were curious to see if this effect was translating there, especially compared to classic antidepressants that have a very well-known problem with sexual dysfunction. And this is basically what we found. So we found that psilocybin-assisted therapy for depression was associated with positive improvements in sexual functioning in the people undergoing through it, while people being treated with classic antidepressants were more likely to report decreases in sexual functioning.
Fascinating. And were you seeing similar rates of improvement in naturalistic versus a clinical research setting?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
There were a few small differences. That was that people in the naturalistic survey reported that later on to be more open to try new things in their sex life compared to before, while people in the depression study, they did not report changes in this domain. That it could probably be that people that go to have psychedelic experiences around the world, they tend to probably start with a higher openness overall in their life than the people that are treated for depression. So this was an interesting difference between the two groups.
We have a fun question from Twitter here. Those were couples, right? Just single individuals who were part of a couple, or just how would that shake out?
Mm-hmm. So we didn't look at couples yet. So we're single individuals that were part of a couples, or maybe singles and having different partners. We are now looking at couples, and this is a study that I will briefly discuss maybe later on. But then the next stage is now actually looking at couples doing psychedelics together.
Great. That's interesting. I love that you're going to follow up with this. So what kind of so was it kind of survey based? So you had like just pretty much measures that you guys figured out you wanted to dig in on, or did you develop your own measures, or were they pre-existing?
We had a few questions that were like around 7 and 8 questions about the topic inserted in both studies, because they were not studies designed for this purpose, but we collected a lot of different measures about a lot of different things in both the clinical trial and the big observational study that we ran a few years ago. And in this sample of questions, we also had questions about the sex life of people, basically, but it wasn't just aimed at that. And that's why we also don't have a big ample breadth of questions, and we have them now in the study that we are running.
How many people were you able to have in each cohort, like the clinical group and the naturalistic group?
So we got like 200 and around 250 in the big one. And in the control study one, that was psilocybin for depression versus escitalopram, that is a common SSRI, we had 59 with 29 in the escitalopram group and 30 in the psilocybin group.
Amazing. Was it harder to recruit the clinical group?
Like it took a long time. I wasn't personally involved in that. I was still a student when that study happened. So I arrived at the study was almost finished, and people were wrapping up and writing the paper. That, by the way, the study I'm referring to is the trial of psilocybin versus escitalopram from depression, and is from Robin Cara-Harris and colleagues, published in 2021. So it's a study that has been published a while ago with the main findings. And it took quite some time. Like, inclusion criteria for clinical trials are quite strict, but it lasted for a while.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm sure you, as you were going through this process, there were all sorts of kind of tangential insights that weren't really relevant to the paper and where you were going. Was there anything like worth noting or sharing about observations that people might want to dig into later with research?
I think something that I'm just mentioning this that because I find it fascinating. So the study is not on the acute effects of psychedelics on sex, and not about sensations that people have when they are under psychedelics. So we looked at long-term changes. So all the results that I mentioned are post-acute, happen at 4 weeks, 6 weeks, or 6 months after the experience. So way after the drugs has been cleared from the system. And the very limited research that there is on serotonin 2A agonists on sexual functioning, it hints to the idea that these drugs inhibit sexual functioning. It's research done in animals and has been quite old, but there are like qualitative reports of people reporting very like orgasmic like and sensual feelings while are under the effects of psychedelics. And we have a similar report that was included in the qualitative paper of the psilocybin for depression trial 1, where patients reported very like ecstatic and orgasmic feelings in their body while under the influence of psilocybin. And an interesting thing that I've done a while ago was copying one of these reports into ChatGPT and asking like, what is this? And without saying it was coming from a psychedelic, and what ChatGPT told me was that it sounded like a Kundalini awakening from yoga, what I was describing. And it's not something I was really familiar with. And then I kind of like digged a bit into reading about what a Kundalini awakening is. And it's kind of similar to these descriptions that people are reporting under the effects of psychedelics. But again, it's something that it just stopped there. But I think it's quite like a funny, interesting thing from a side that if someone is interested in this and want to discover more, maybe it's a very unresearched topic.
So somebody on Instagram commented twice so far. They're very interested to be involved in the couples study. Is there any way to enroll in that, or is that recruiting yet?
So the study is online, naturalistic, and it looks at couples that are planning to take MDMA or classic psychedelics together in their home setting. And we are currently like recruiting it all over the world. So if you're planning to have one such experience with your partner for some Valentine time or later on or anything like this, we would love to get data out of you. We're not providing any drug. We are not inviting people in the trial, but it's observational naturalistic. I don't know if there's a way there where I could share this link to people, but I might.
If you put it in the chat, I'll make sure we share it on our socials later on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, so everybody just follow up on our socials, and you'll definitely get a link there. There's another fun question here from Court Wing on Instagram. Were you able to track or correlate anti-anhedonic effects or decreases in experiential avoidance and ruminative thinking?
We didn't correlate it with the changes in sexual functioning, but I believe that there could be like a theoretical link to maybe like suppression of the feelings. And my previous paper that I published in 2022, it was looking at the anti-suppression effects of psilocybin therapy, and we found that psilocybin therapy was associated with robust decreases and suppression of negative emotions compared to classic antidepressants, where even if people improved in depression, their suppression remained the same. So this kind of ends at the mechanistic differential effect of the two drugs. And I suspect there might be something there related to the sexuality aspect, but we haven't investigated it yet.
Very cool. Yeah. I'm kind of curious about any other neurological observations or assumptions that you might have made about what was going on in the background there.
Mm-hmm. So this very speculative neuroscience point of view that I could bring into this is that we while I was writing this paper and trying to understand what was going on, I went quite deep into the neurobiology of sexual dysfunction and hypoactive sexual desire disorder. And there's this neuroimaging review that looks at female with hypoactive sexual desire disorder without no apparent biological cause. And what was found was that these people had an hyperactivation in brain circuits that were linked to self-monitoring. So basically, these people looked that they had a very intense suppression circuit going on that basically like made them unable to disengage, for example, with what they were thinking about their life in the moment, or maybe like overthinking about how they were looking while they were having sex, and all these aspects. So like it looked at this monitoring aspect was overactivated in their brain, and this was linked to the inability to maybe experience any bottom-up arousal in their body. And these brain circuits are the ones that are also acutely disrupted by psychedelics, and are the same that are implicated in depression in some sense. So there's a link there again with this overactive self system. This explained in very simplistic terms, because of course it's not that easy as I'm explaining it here, but still it looks that there might be something here that maybe psychedelics are able to tackle, that then is linked with maybe reactivation of desire, because like for experiencing sexual desire, it's like it's an interplay between your body and your brain. And if you need to have like physical arousal, but your brain needs to be able to interpret arousal in your higher systems in order to give it a positive valence that then reinforces the feelings and so forth. And then you enter in a place where you can engage in sexual activities. But if the circuit is disrupted, then it becomes really difficult to engage in that.
That's fascinating. And how would we, like, say we wanted to actually pin that down and make it, provable in a lab? Is there any kind of like imaging that you could help with that?
Yeah, we would have to do imaging on this, and I'm not sure like we are there yet to bring that directly. If psychedelics were like some sort of hypoactive sexual desire disorder, I think still sounds like a bit of an invasive thing. I think that could be a very cool, interesting study on the basis of that, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But would be definitely a very cool one.
That's interesting. I think I know the answer to this one, but somebody from Instagram asks, and it's a little leading, but I think you'll see what I'm saying. Did you screen for potential psychosis or history of psychosis?
Yeah. It's
and
common
what's
practice.
The why
there? The reason is that so in any clinical trial we screen for these people. It doesn't happen in the naturalistic study where anyone that wants to take a psychedelic can, but usually retreat centers where people do ayahuasca or do mushroom ceremonies, they screen for this. And the reason is precautionary, because you don't want to induce a psychotic state if your family is familiar to psychosis or so on. And let's say, like, again, using a simplification, if the brain that is experiencing psychosis maybe does a bit too much entropy in a level of which like the information is not restrained enough, and then you experience hallucinations and delusions and so on, then maybe a psychedelic that induce even more entropy in the system is not the best thing to do while you are under these disorders. Again, it's a theoretical precautionary tale that we have to screen for. I know there is ongoing discourse around this topic, but yeah, for now, people that have an history of psychosis, either family or a family history of psychosis, are screened out from trials.
Great, thanks for that. I'm also kind of curious, like, you're recruiting, right, for this naturalistic study. People are doing this quite actively already. Some people will then see the study and go, oh, let's try that. Like, what kind of like major precautions would you tell people going in that like want to be part of that study, who perhaps aren't experienced yet or actively doing this kind of stuff?
So we have like at the initial part when people sign up, we have like resources that are linked to like harm reduction about psychedelics, and also like about relationships for people to have understanding if they are, for example, in an abusive relationship, maybe they should not have such an experience. So those are like the precautionary points that we have for people entering in such studies. But at the end, like it's up to them doing this or not. And the big disclaimer is that they should not take part in something like this just because they want to help research. If it's something they were already interested in and they want to proceed, and maybe they thought, okay, we do this once a year and now we found a study, or maybe we never done it but we're really curious to try, and then we found the study and we want to like do it anyway and help science, then it's when people should do it. But it's not a study where like, yeah, someone will like screen you out and like understand what could be the potential dangers and so on. And yeah, I think that is one precaution. There are different possibilities that people can have with their partner. I think from qualitative understanding of the experience, MDMA done with one partner is less deep and possibly complex experience than doing a classic psychedelic with one partner. So that is also something that people maybe should be a bit aware of. But again, it's by being naturalistic and uncontrolled, it's more up to them than to us, and we give some possibilities for them to harm reduction and understand what they're going through. But they need to like read and understand. I think understanding what someone is doing with this powerful compounds is always really important.
I love that. Yeah, it makes me like how. Well, first, before I go into that one, do you in the UK like have this phrase, do it for science? Like just kind of like jokingly say like we're gonna do it for science. Like I was talking about designing novel ways of administering DMT with like better, easier devices recently. And, we're like joking about it. Yeah, I'll try it for science.
Yeah, yeah,
You have that?
yeah.
Okay, cool.
We do.
So the next question is something around like just the idea of facilitating some sort of research like this in a lab type setting or a more tightly controlled setting is super interesting to me, but I just have no idea how that could even happen. It seems like the ethics review would be really complicated, like the justification for the science would be super complicated, like actual sex in like a lab setting, right? But I'm sure this is actually already happening
Yeah, no,
just without drugs, right?
I don't think like, yeah, it happened without drugs, but I don't think we need to be there. Like, I think the very important message around this topic is that
Clipboards
you
and
don't need to have sex
commentary.
on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you really don't need to have sex on drugs to get these things. Like, we are really interested. Let's say, like, if people are having mushrooms with the partner and they're going for a hike and they talk all the time, these are the people that we want. Like, you don't need to stay at home and trying to like have anything about sex. There's in the study, there's not even, we don't even almost ask any questions about if people actually had sexual experiences under it. It's not really the interest that we have, like, because yeah, you can probably have an amazing time having sex on MDMA with your partner, but will that result in any improvement in the quality of your relationship if done for the sake of that? I'm not sure. And maybe like a more fruitful way to spend your time is actually chatting about the problems that you have in your relationships and things that normally you don't do. And I think this is where the magic happens. And again, like, I'm not trying to be overly conservative here, but I think that when you add some exploration into something that maybe you think normally is just hedonistic, I think that is when it can make long-term changes in your life, and you need to commit to them. Like, you can do MDMA with your partner and then hope that those feelings will last forever. Otherwise, you just get addicted to a feeling of love that is normally not reachable by our brains. But you can use that state as a catalyst to improve better. So trying to understand what is not working, what could be done better, and break down the barriers that you normally have and what is right and what is wrong. And I think this is where the important work can happen.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And this concept of feeling almost artificial levels of love purely from, the drug use is super interesting, and I think a really important caveat because there's a lot of problematic use out there. And, I think people typically would move on from that at a certain point, hopefully. But, it's a good observation that people should be hearing. But you're right that it can be used as a tool to improve actual relationships in really helpful ways. But we need to really flesh out that conversation so people have some sort of framework to be working with in their own lives if they're going to be doing this stuff already. So got another question here. I'm going to put it on screen for you. Vladislav has been asking some great questions. He's asking, would you say that set and setting would play a crucial role in couples' experience? It looks like we lost Tommaso temporarily. I think he'll be back in a moment. So I'll read this again. Would you say that set and setting would play a crucial role in couples? Oh, here we go. Great. Thanks for coming back.
Did it all get lost?
Oh, no, you just dropped for a moment. All good.
Okay, sorry. Like Imperial Wi-Fi every while and then goes through a reset and stops for a few seconds.
All good. So we're asking this question here from Vladislav about set and setting, for instance, with MDMA. I'm not exactly sure the direction this question is intending to go, but comparing a club scenario versus like time together in a more private environment, like I imagine there would be very different impacts. Like if you're in a club,
I think like our study is potentially open to all of this. We're asking people the motives while they're doing it, where they're doing it. So we will take all this into account. But I agree, like you can have an amazing experience at the club, but the focus is not really your relationship. And otherwise, if you think about like that just taking a drug could be enough to like make changes, then you could just take a drug, take MDMA, go through a rave, and then you would be cured from PTSD. While this doesn't really happen. So I think that what really makes the difference is what you do while you're under these states. And what you talk about, what you discuss about is, I think, is where the big changes could happen.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and there's like the idea of a club environment. Well, we might have an image of a club being one thing. The club experience could be hundreds of things. It's not. Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying that like people, should not do it at all, and it shouldn't be something that, like it's horrible for your relationship and all of that. I'm not saying anything of this, but it's probably like, there are better ways if you want to go into such an experience.
Agreed. Yeah. There's a lot going on there. So we're having another question here from a friend, Ashley Walsh, who's also involved in some research. How do you screen for psychosis? I think we kind of did that, but in the clinical group, this was already done before you even got the data, right? And then in the naturalistic group, we assume it was done by the retreat centers. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't want to like go deep in something that I don't fully know in details, but we have doctors that screen people all the time around these trials, and there are like standard tests. Like one is called the mini examination that goes through like different checklists of several mental health disorders, and you try to understand that. Plus, you also ask people if there was anyone in their family or if they ever received such a diagnosis. And you go first, ask for that, but also when they're screened, they also receive a mental health screening done by a professional in which if they find sign of something like this, then people are screened out.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for that. I love how engaged the listeners are, and this is from all the different platforms, which is great. I have one here from Instagram I can't share on screen. And just kind of off the cuff comment. You don't have to, this isn't a super scientific question. Ketsia says, thank you. I'm very interested in looking into the ethics of integrating psychedelics into society And I often wonder how screening may look in future United States clinics and psychedelic businesses. And I think this is kind of a repeat of the last one. Like, you're not a psychiatrist, but I think carefully, and I hope we just improve our screening processes over time as we have more data to
Yeah,
work with.
yeah,
Anything you would
yeah.
add to that?
No, I agree with you. I think we need still to understand a lot of the conditions that can be associated with a positive response and which aren't. And yeah, for example, like let's say like there was a study that came out quite recently that showed that having a personality disorder was associated with way higher likelihood of having a prolonged negative experience to a psychedelic compared to people that do not have such a disorder. But still, it showed that some people with personality disorder, they got a positive experience out of psychedelics. So it's not a hard yes or no. It's just about like what you should do, what the amount of support that you are receiving, and so on. And for example, there's a lot of talks around should psychedelics tried as an intervention for borderline personality disorder, that is one of the most severe and complex to treat. And like the potential is possibly, but the amount of care that needs to be associated with that needs to be really high. And I think the more complex your psychiatric history is and the more vulnerable you are, the more you need the help of a professional to navigate this very unfamiliar space in a way that is not harmful to you.
Mm, yeah. Um, Another question here, and thanks for being willing to answer so many questions from the audience. Vladislav, I love that you're asking so many questions. Do you plan to add questions to the new study with this type of connection estimation? I think this is from a question or two ago. Does that make sense?
Which connection?
Yeah, exactly. Vladislav, if you want to add a little more clarity on your question, we'll try to bring this back. Um, I wonder, is there? So one thing I was very happy to see when I looked at the cover page of your paper was that David Nutt was a co-author, and David Nutt was very famously getting in trouble in the UK around saying MDMA is safer than riding horses. Um, can you speak a little bit to MDMA safety, generally speaking,
Mm-hmm.
or like the harm
Yeah,
profile, risk
so
profile?
that was the whole story that made Devinat in a lot of trouble in the past. And Devinat is my boss and one of the biggest psychopharmacologists of all times. And yeah, like what happened back then is that he was commissioned from the government to write a report on the dangers of drugs and how they were associated with death risks and severe injury risks and so on. And he realized that a lot of drugs that are now classified as extremely dangerous, and these ones are psychedelics too, they end up to be not as dangerous as people believe they are. And a lot of dangers that are related to these drugs sometimes are related to the legality of it, because in real world settings, the most people that they think, for example, that they are taking MDMA, they are not taking MDMA, but they are taking some sort of analogs that give some sort of similar feelings of euphoria, but it's not really MDMA. And it's really difficult to test. Services like sometimes are legal in a lot of countries to test drugs, and because of the prohibition and so on. And this contributes to maybe like a lot of deaths that normally wouldn't happen. And also because pills do not have the right amount of dose that is inside. And so like some pills maybe contain double the dose that someone is expected to take. And then people take a crazy dose, and then they problems with their hydration and the regulation of body temperature. And again, like it's this experience, I'm not saying that are risk-free, but they should be maybe like compared to something that is like, I don't know, a high-risk sport that can provide you like with a lot of positive and great life experience, but also is associated with some dangers. And people should be aware of the possible dangers that they are encountering. And I think one big negative consequence of the prohibitionist law is this, that people do not have informed consent to make choices. For example, let's make a comparison that is not completely directed to this, but I think makes in my mind a lot of sense with like all the deaths that have been happening recently and with fentanyl in the US. And it's becoming a big problem. And a lot of people that are dying from fentanyl, they have no idea that they're taking fentanyl, because fentanyl is put inside cocaine for making it stronger and paying less out of these drugs. But someone that is making the informed consent of making a line of cocaine, that I'm not saying this is good or right, but likely won't end up in death of this person. They might end up dying just because inside this drug there was something they had no idea it was containing it. And I think this is horrible. And it's really linked to the fact that there is so much prohibition, and people sometimes are not able to go and check the drugs because of laws and all of that. So yeah, there's I think a lot of these problems are linked to how the system tries to regulate these compounds.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I love how you phrased all of it too. David Nutt and others famously published a study. I think it was in 2009 in the Lancet, doing relative drug harms to self and others. And surprise, surprise, alcohol actually topped the chart in harm to self and others, and LSD and psilocybin were the lowest. MDMA was somewhere in the middle. And I remember David Nutt coming out and saying, the conclusion I make here is that if we're going towards a science-based drug policy, we need to immediately decriminalize everything safer than alcohol and then work towards, improving policy more generally. And I was like, hell yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Has the fentanyl issue made it to the UK yet, as far as you know, inside cocaine or any other
substances? Not as far as I know. I haven't heard it on the newspapers yet. I don't think it's a major Europe thing, but again, it might come. And
Right. The UK famously just had a lot of success around drug checking with an amazing charity called The Loop, who's doing on-site drug testing daily to help keep people safe, which I think is extraordinary. They had a big success at a festival years ago. They actually presented their data at Horizons, and I was there to watch. I think they reduced hospitalizations at a festival year over year by 80%.
Wow.
Just by offering on-site drug checking. Which is a boon to all the people who are going, all the staff and security, insurance companies, every stakeholder benefited from that, I think. So really amazing.
They've been doing amazing work, and I agree. And also like what the charity of David Nutt is doing, drug science, that is really about like informing science-based and information and harm reduction on drugs, has been amazing to inform the public discourse.
Agreed. Yeah, it's you've got an amazing boss. I love that you're working with David. That's so great.
I agree.
So earlier in your career, did you know you wanted to go into the psychedelic space? Did you happen to do time at Maastricht studying 5-MeO?
Yeah. I wasn't working with the 5-MeO stuff in Maastricht. I was there right before COVID happened, and then I ended up like in a COVID-fueled hysteria back then. So it was like I studied there, I trained, I did my master there, and then COVID happened, and I ended up doing some online work on EEG, that is electroencephalography, that is these caps where they record brain data. I did some work on that. And then I ended up just jumping into the UK during COVID 4 days before Brexit in an attempt to escape the draconian closures that now happened. So I kind of had I was quite glad I made this, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to even do my PhD as I'm doing now.
Amazing. And what in particular made psychedelics and MDMA of interest to you? As far as you want to go.
No, I think where my academic interest came from, that was way more on psychedelics rather than MDMA. And I'm not really doing research on MDMA outside of this couple stuff that is naturalistic. But now here at Imperial, at the Center for Psychedelic Research, we are not really like doing work on MDMA. But what made me interested in it was my interest in psychoanalysis that I had in the past. And I was quite familiar with the work of Freud and Carl Jung, and I was reading all around the topics and around dreams and the unconscious, and how like the unconscious might be a part of our mind. And by doing such readings, I ended up in the work from Robin Cara Harris, that was my master thesis supervisor, and now he moved to San Francisco, but was the founder of the center here. And I could see how he was talking about psychedelics as a way to assess the unconscious mind in a state that wasn't through dreams, that are notoriously very unpredictable and cryptic to understand while you are up again. And that made really instant click in my mind, and I was like, wow, this is so fascinating. I want to read more about I want to read more about it. I want to understand more about it. And it kind of like hinted a very like deep interest into this topic that made me move away from what I was doing before, with an attempt to develop a career in this field. And for now it's worked quite well, so I'm happy I got that idea a while ago, and I'm glad that it happened through a mixture of kind of like persistence and luck too.
About 2 weeks ago, I got to record with Robin in his office in San Francisco. It was really great.
Oh,
And we got into the Freudian topic and the neurological, path, and then also, how psychedelics made it more easy to study. Fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah.
Have you did you do a podcast with him?
Yeah, it should come out in a few weeks, I hope. I was really excited
Amazing.
to be able to be with him in person. I got to see Manesh Gurn in person there, which was lovely.
Okay. Yeah.
Beautiful building. I'm excited that he's in San Francisco, and a really interesting thing for me is that he's right across the bay from Gul Dalin now, who's at Berkeley, I think. And so, slightly different approaches, but I think their proximity might actually breed some interesting developments. And hopefully collaborations. We'll see.
Yeah, no,
But
I agree.
I like the competitive spirit too. So like, hopefully they just keep trying to raise.
Yeah. Sometimes like this competition brings up great things, with great minds are trying to get at.
Is there anything is there anything around this concept of plasticity that you think might come through with this study around sex and psychedelics?
More around the works with couples, I would say, generally, because I think that's why psychedelics can be great in a tool for improving relationship satisfaction. Because let's say like you've been with your partner for 10-15 years, and but it doesn't need to be this long, and slowly you develop a model of who the person that you're dating in and you're spending time with is, and you kind of like slowly develop, usually without a lot of communication, an idea of what this person like, what this person doesn't like, both sexually and emotionally, how this person wants to be treated, how you should approach them, and so on. And this ends up to become like an idea of who your partner is, but that's usually doesn't fully compare to the reality, because reality is very noisy and unsure to understand. And it's thing that I always get back to is this idea that in our real world there's enough noise in the information that we perceive to make everything that you really want to believe to become the reality that you experience in everyday life. And to give you a concrete example on this, let's say your partner is like you end up thinking that your partner really loves you in a positive way, and this idea that your partner really loves you, that is something you strongly believe, becomes the reality that you experience. So that if sometimes this person acts in a bad way or in a way that doesn't really comply with what you think, you might just like let it go and be quite relaxing and flexible, because deep down you know that this person loves you and you are really connected to them. But on the other side, like let's say you developed a sort of low-level trauma with your partner, and you develop a belief that, oh, my partner is an untrustworthy person. And then every time something happens in the relationship that kind of hints to that belief, you will just think, okay, oh, I'm right. My partner is someone I can trust. And so you become excessively jealous, excessively possessive, and so on. And this person might react to you in a way that will make them actually distancing from you, and then you develop this self-fulfilling prophecies that might end up breaking your relationship or creating a very divisive route in which you really struggle to come closer again. And I think that's where psychedelics could come in and really make a difference by dissolving and relaxing these beliefs that you have about your partner, and maybe about yourself too, that can recreate a new definition on who's your couple is.
Thank you. Got another fun question here from Twitter. Will you evaluate things like discussing during trips topics that were never discussed together before, kind of like a guarded thing, and maybe some emotionally strong situations from the past that by sharing them created better connection between the two?
Yeah, we ask questions in our questionnaires, and it's something that we are curious to see if then will mediate improvements in the relationship quality. I think I'm really curious to see what could be the difference between MDMA and classic psychedelics, because classic psychedelics do not pull down the fear response like MDMA does. So maybe in such moments, maybe MDMA is more adapt than classic psychedelics to do such a thing, and maybe how classic psychedelics are improving the relationship satisfaction is through other mechanisms that maybe are not the ones in the difficult conversations. But it could be. I'm not saying it's not, because maybe I've read reports. There's a qualitative paper that came out a while ago from Natasha Manson from Maastricht University that is interviewing couples that took psychedelics together, and there was one that couples said, oh, when we are under LSD, we can talk about things without arguing at all, and we really understand each other's perspective. So it could be. And I'm curious to see some data on this before I can say that that's actually something that like works the same way for psilocybin and classics and MDMA.
Love that. It makes me think about, as part of the naturalistic group, perhaps looking at combined LSD MDMA or mushrooms MDMA. I think that would be very interesting to have that as like a, 3 groups maybe, and then because there is increasing use in the wild of combining those. So definitely accelerating from what I've seen.
Yeah, there was a paper that I think Robin was a co-author to that came out a while ago about combining these 2 drugs together, and they hinted at the end that the couples approaches might be a good place where this combination can be fruitful.
That's interesting. Cool. So I kind of want to make sure, was there anything that we may have missed, Tommaso, that you want to make sure we get in here today?
Not that I can think of. Like, I think we covered most of it, and I think we went quite in a few interesting tangents that maybe are not really included in the paper. We didn't discuss, too much the results, but there's so much people can go and read. So I agree that these things are interesting to be done by covering aspects of the topic that might not be directly included in the scientific publication. So I think, we had a great conversation. I think we covered a lot of interesting directions where this could go.
I have a very final question, because I'm a little bit involved in a lobby here in the United States that's working to increase science funding for psychedelics, because our science funding for psychedelics over here is really bad from the federal government. How is the funding for psychedelic research generally in UK? Similar?
It's not better than the US. Yeah, it's very, very similar. It's very, very similar. So we're not in a relaxed terrain here.
Right. Despite all the papers everybody sees coming out of Imperial, it's
yeah.
I love that. All right. Well, Tommaso, I really appreciate you coming on today. I want to thank everybody for watching this live. This will be on YouTube, probably Twitch. I think we'll also be able to save it in our Instagram feed and a few other spots. So if you want to watch this again, please do, or share with a friend. And Tommaso, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast for a real deal podcast. I think that's going to be extraordinary.
Really looking forward to it. And I saved a few interesting bits for that one. so we didn't, lose all the secrets over here.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks so much, and thanks for tuning in, everybody. Until next
Thank you,
time.
everyone. Bye bye.